I'm Margaret, and I never imagined the day would come when my own son would throw me out of the house I built with my youth, leaving me to end up living in a car, clutching an old blanket. I wonder at what point in my life I went wrong. It's like a sharp knife stabbed directly into my heart. A simple argument and everything that mattered to me vanished as if it had never existed. That day was a Tuesday. I remember it well because the sky was gray, a gray that oppresses the soul. He entered the living room with tense energy, restless. Something wasn't right. I felt it instantly. Michael had always been a reserved, thoughtful boy, but there was a storm behind his silence. That day, he wouldn't look me in the eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," he said with a hoarse voice. My heart skipped a beat. I sat on the sofa trying to maintain calm, though inside I was filled with anxiety. "What's wrong, son?" I asked, gripping the edge of my blouse. He didn't beat around the bush. "Mom, I think it's time for you to leave." My ears rang. I felt dizzy, as if all the blood had been drained from my body. Just a month ago, I had transferred the property deed of the house to him, the house that was my entire life. He told me it was a way to build credit history, to prepare for the future. I believed him. I let out a bitter laugh, but the sound was like that of a broken mirror. "Michael, this is our home. I've dedicated my entire youth to raising you in this house. Do you remember those winter nights when we cuddled on the old sofa to watch cartoons? The sofa creaked every time you jumped, but you refused to change it because you said it had soul. I still keep that blanket in the closet." "I know," he interrupted with an indifferent voice. "But that's the past, Mom. Now things are different. Jessica and I need our space. The house is too small, and Jessica is about to give birth. We need room for the baby." I thought I had misheard. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, was pregnant with my first grandchild. I knew the house wasn't large. It only had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and the kitchen where I had prepared hundreds of meals for Michael, but I never thought I'd be a burden. Jessica came out of the kitchen, holding her belly, her eyes sharp as knives. "Margaret, it's not that we want this," she said with a cold voice. "But the reality is there isn't enough space in this house. The baby needs her own room. And I want my daughter to be born in the best possible environment. Not living with some old hag like you. I think you understand, right?" I looked at Michael, searching for some trace of the boy who used to run to hug me every night, whispering, "Mom, you're my whole world." But that boy had disappeared. In his place was a stranger who remained silent, letting his wife speak for him. "Michael," I whispered with tears beginning to sting my eyes, "do you realize what you're saying? Are you asking me to leave my own house?" He didn't respond. That silence was louder than any scream. I got up on trembling legs and went into my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, caressing the blanket I had sewn myself when Michael was little. Each stitch was a memory. The sleepless nights counting money to pay debts. The day Michael ran into the kitchen to show me his excellent grade, or the nights when we ate pizza on the floor because the table had broken. But I began to pack. Not because I agreed, not because I wanted to leave, but because I had no strength to argue. My heart was breaking into pieces, and I didn't know how to put it back together. I packed a pair of shoes, the silver necklace my mother had left me, and a photo of Michael when he was 3 years old, his face covered with birthday cake cream, smiling from ear to ear. I only took what fit in a small suitcase, as if my entire life could be summarized in a few objects. When I dragged the suitcase toward the door, Jessica was still there, holding her belly. "We need space for the baby, Margaret. You'll be fine," she said with an expressionless voice. I looked at her, wanting to scream that I wasn't fine, that I had given everything for Michael, for this house, and now they were treating me like a hindrance. But I said nothing. Michael was behind her and finally spoke. "Mom, let me carry the suitcase to the car." I shook my head. My voice choked. "I don't need your help," I said with eyes full of tears. The rain began to fall, cold drops hitting my face, blurring everything: my eyes, the road, and the feeling of desperation consuming me. I got out to the car, an old Toyota that had accompanied me for 15 years. I opened the door, threw the suitcase into the back seat, and sat in the driver's seat. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key into the ignition. I didn't know where I was going. No plans, no savings. A mother who had sacrificed her life for her children and had somehow become so easy to discard. As I drove away, I stared fixedly in the rearview mirror, waiting, praying for Michael to run after me, saying he had made a mistake, begging me to stay. But he didn't. And that's when the truth hit me. I drove aimlessly, without destination. Only the piercing pain in my chest and the sound of rain hitting the windshield. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. But that day, in that moment, everything seemed like the end of my life, of everything I had known, the day my world collapsed. It was also the day I understood that if I wanted to keep existing, I had to start from scratch. People used to tell me, "Margaret, you're spoiling that boy too much." But how could I not spoil him? Michael was my breath, the reason I kept living. When his little hand squeezed my finger at birth, I promised silently, "I'll give you a better life than mine, even if I have to sacrifice everything." His father left when Michael was only 2 years old. One morning he stood at the door and said he wasn't born to live this kind of life. Then he left without a word of goodbye, without child support, leaving me alone with a child and bills piled up like an approaching storm. I still remember the day I got my second job. During the day, I worked as a waitress in a restaurant, and at night I cleaned offices, scrubbed bathrooms, took out trash while Michael slept at the neighbor's house. She took pity on us. I'd return at midnight, tiptoeing through the door, going directly to my son's room just to sit by his bed and watch him breathe. Most of those nights, I went without eating. I'd tell Michael I wasn't hungry, even though my stomach growled like fire. If there was only enough for one portion, that portion was for him. Always for him. When Michael grew up and asked why I never bought anything for myself, I'd simply smile and say, "I don't need much. I just need you to be healthy." And he'd hug me, smiling from ear to ear. "Mom, you're number one." That was enough to keep me going. But being a single mother was never easy. There were freezing winters when the heater broke, and I had to wrap Michael in 3 layers of blankets while I sat by the door, watching that rats didn't enter through the cracks. There were birthdays when I didn't have enough money to buy him a gift, so I made a very simple cake, put some gummy candies on it, and said, "This cake is just what you've always wanted, right?" Michael never complained. He never made me feel I was deficient or a bad mother. That's why I loved him even more when he started getting good grades, winning diplomas and medals. I felt all my efforts had been rewarded. I framed each certificate, hanging them on the peeling paint wall of our old apartment as if they were gold medals of my life. I used to tell him, "Education is the path to freedom, so you won't have to struggle every day like me." And he listened. Michael studied hard and was then accepted to a prestigious university. The day he received the acceptance letter, he ran to me, lifted the letter, and shouted through tears, "Mom, I made it." I did it. I cried too, not only from joy, but also because I didn't know where I was going to get the money for that dream. I had no savings, no family to support me. Only a small pension I had been secretly saving. Maybe for a small apartment when I got old, or in case I got sick. But seeing Michael full of faith and hope, I knew I would never hesitate. I withdrew the entire fund, every cent. He didn't know. I didn't want my son to carry that sacrifice. I told him a scholarship covered most of it. that some relatives were helping a little. The truth was, I had traded my entire future to buy him a ticket out. I bought a used laptop and some of the best secondhand clothes. At first, we talked often. He'd call me after class, tell me about his teachers, his new friends, the cafeteria food. I clung to every word as if it were gold. But gradually, the calls became shorter and then less frequent. I told myself he was just busy. That's what young people do. They get swept up in their new world. However, I kept waiting by the phone every Sunday, just in case. When Michael graduated from college, I felt like my heart had crossed the finish line. After a race that had lasted almost 30 years, the child who had fallen on his knees bleeding from going too fast on his bicycle, who waited for me at the school gate with a longing look, now wore a graduation gown, standing proudly in the middle of campus with a radiant smile. I applauded until my hands hurt. My tears fell from beginning to end of the ceremony, not from sadness, but from emotion and perhaps also from exhaustion after too long a journey. I whispered words of gratitude to God, to life, to myself. 2 weeks later, Michael returned home. He said he needed time to settle in, to find a job and save before becoming independent. I didn't hesitate for a second. I cleaned his old room, bought the kind of cereal he used to eat for breakfast again, folded new towels and some shirts in the drawer, as if Michael were still a sixth-grade child preparing for his first day of school. "I'm proud of you, Michael," I told him one cold night as we both sat on the steps, watching the city lights flicker. He smiled, his eyes shining under the porch light. "I couldn't have done anything without you." I kept those words in my heart. I believed them. A month later, Michael entered the kitchen with his hands intertwined, his gaze evasive, the same expression he used to make when he was about to confess a bad grade as a child. "Mom," he hesitated. "I was thinking, if you could temporarily transfer the house title to my name. It's just a formality. I need it to build credit, to start a financial history." He said he had consulted with a friend who worked in real estate, and this was a smart, legal, and safe way. I stopped in my tracks. The house was the only thing still titled in my name, the last vestige of my life. But the way he looked at me in that moment, I didn't think about it too much. It was Michael. It was my son. I had trusted him my whole life, and this time too. "All right," I replied, trying to smile. "If it really helps you." We did the transfer paperwork the following week. He patted my shoulder and smiled. "You're not going anywhere. This will always be your home forever." I wanted to believe it, but 2 weeks later, cracks began to appear. Not loud ones, not obvious ones, just small details, but they hurt more than any blow. Michael no longer had dinner with me. He spent most of his time in his room or away from home. I called him several times, invited him to dinner, to watch a movie, but he only responded with indifference, and then disappeared behind the wooden door where we both used to draw 5-pointed stars when he was little. Every time I tried to talk, Michael was distracted, with his eyes glued to his phone or looking elsewhere. Between us, there were no longer conversations, just prolonged silence, heavy as stones in the heart. That night, I parked in a remote corner of the parking lot, near the wire fence where few people noticed. This rest area had nothing special about it: a small convenience store, some gas pumps, and a public bathroom that always smelled of bleach. But for me, it was now my whole world. I had no money, no plans, nowhere to go. The first night in my car was the hardest, but it wasn't the last. The manager there was very kind and let me stay as long as I didn't cause trouble. I covered the car windows with towels to block the light and curious glances. I used some old towels I used to keep in the trunk to clean the seats when Michael spilled soda as a child. Now they were my curtains, the only thing separating me from the outside world. I curled up under the thin blanket, trying to sleep, but the back seat was narrow. My back hurt, and the cold seeped through the glass, making me shiver. Every noise, the sound of wheels on gravel, the slam of the bathroom door, or someone's laughter in the distance, made me startle, gripping the car keys tightly, ready to drive if someone knocked on the door. I tried to stay clean, though it wasn't easy. Every morning, I snuck into the public bathroom at the station when dawn broke, when there weren't many people yet, carrying a small cloth bag with my toothbrush, soap, and cheap mouthwash. The hot water from the tap was the greatest luxury I had. I'd stand in front of the sink, scrub my face, brush my tangled hair with a plastic comb, trying to look like a normal person. But every time I looked in the fogged mirror on the wall, I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. My eyes were sunken, my hair full of gray, and the look in my eyes empty, as if I had lost part of my soul. "Who are you, Margaret?" I'd whisper and then turn away, not daring to look for long. I washed my clothes in that same sink, carrying a shirt, pants, or sometimes just underwear. I'd rub soap under the tap, trying to make sure no one saw me. I'd shake them hard, wrap them in a towel to carry back to the car, then hang them inside the window to dry. I only had 3 sets of clothes and rotated them, folding them carefully so no one would realize I wore the same thing over and over. I didn't want anyone to know I was homeless. I didn't want to see looks of pity or worse, looks of contempt. Eating was another challenge. I had a cloth bag with crackers, some canned fruit, and a jar of peanuts I had bought at the convenience store. I ate little by little, savoring slowly to trick my stomach into thinking it was full. I hid the bag under the seat, fearing someone looking inside the car would guess my situation. Once, a man stopped near the car, smoking and looking through the glass. I pretended to read an old magazine with my heart pounding hard, praying he'd go elsewhere. When he left, I sighed in relief, but the feeling of shame remained like an unwelcome guest. I avoided familiar places. I didn't dare drive through my old neighborhood, fearing someone from church or the neighbors would recognize me. I learned to rotate my clothes, to fold them carefully, to make wrinkled blouses look intentional. I kept my shoes clean, my nails trimmed. I combed my hair every morning, even when I hadn't slept, because I wasn't going to let the world see me homeless, even if I was. I kept walking upright when I entered a store. I kept smiling politely to strangers. I kept saying, "Good morning," as if nothing was wrong. People think homelessness is dirty, lazy, some kind of character failure. But that's not what it is. It's quiet. It's sitting alone in your car when the sun rises, combing your hair in the rearview mirror and whispering to yourself, "Are you okay? Just one more day." It's learning which gas station has decent bathrooms, which grocery store won't kick you out for sitting in a corner eating a banana you bought with your last dollar. It's holding your breath in public places, hoping no one notices you haven't really showered in days. And it's constantly fighting a voice in your head that says, "Look at you. Look how far you've fallen." But I defended myself. I reminded myself that I was still the woman who had raised a son alone, who used to bring cakes to meetings, who always smiled and asked people how they were. Now I was a shadow avoiding glances, fearing someone would ask, "Margaret, what happened to you?" I had no answer. I didn't want to admit I had lost everything, that I was living like this in a car, like an invisible person. I returned to the car, sat in the darkness of the towels, and faced loneliness. It's not just a feeling of emptiness, it's pain, as if the world had forgotten I exist. Every night, when the outside world sank into silence, I faced myself, the unanswered questions, and nameless pain. I had gotten used to the cold seeping through the glass, the creaking sound of the car seat every time I turned. I'd pull the thin blanket up to my chin, but it gave me no warmth. This night, like every night, I lay there with my eyes open, looking at the car's ceiling, the noises from outside, A passing truck, someone coughing in the distance, only made me feel smaller. I couldn't sleep. Not because of the hard seat or the cold, but because of the thoughts in my head that kept spinning like an old tape that wouldn't stop rewinding. I thought about Michael, my son. The boy who had been the light of my life had now become the man who threw me out of the house I built. I remembered the days when I sacrificed everything for him. Once I sold my wedding ring, the last thing I had left of my husband who had abandoned us, just to buy Michael new soccer cleats. He needed them to play on the school team, and I didn't want him to be embarrassed in front of his friends. I was in the pawn shop, my hand trembling as I handed the ring to the owner, but I smiled because I knew Michael would be happy that night. He came running into the kitchen, hugged me tight, and shouted, "Mom is a superhero!" I laughed, even though I was hungry because I had skipped dinner to save money. Those memories were now like knives cutting my heart. I lay in the car with silent tears running down my face, soaking the collar of the jacket I used as a pillow. I didn't cry loudly. I didn't dare let anyone hear me, even though there was no one here. I just let the tears fall silently as I was living, invisible, unseen by anyone. I wondered why Michael had done this, why Jessica, my daughter-in-law, looked at me like a burden. What had I done wrong? I had given Michael everything: love, time, my dreams. And now he and Jessica needed space for their future child, and I had become a superfluous person. I tried to find a reason. I sat up, wiped tears with my sleeve, trying to breathe deeply to calm myself in the darkness. I opened my wallet and took out a small photo of Michael taken when he was 6 years old, dressed in a superhero costume, smiling radiantly. I caressed the photo with trembling fingers. "Son, what did I do wrong?" I whispered as if he could hear me, but only the sound of wind whistling through the window crack responded. I wanted to tear the photo. I wanted to forget the love I once had for him, but I couldn't. I put the photo back in the wallet, closed it, and lay down feeling uselessness wrap around me like a blanket. I closed my eyes with tears still falling silently. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how long I could endure this. Every day was the same. Comb your hair, make coffee, try not to collapse, and then just survive. But that morning, there was something different. A woman appeared by my car window, knocking gently with her knuckles. I startled, scared, and looked up to see her standing there. Slowly, I lowered the towel, squinting to look through the glass. A woman stood there, about my age, with gray hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a sweat-soaked shirt. She looked exhausted, leaning against the car door as if she were about to fall. Her face was red, her lips dry and cracked. "Excuse me," she said with a weak voice. "I've walked from the gas station, but the sun is too strong. Could I rest a bit?" I hesitated. I wasn't used to talking to strangers. I didn't want anyone to know I was living like this. But looking at her, I couldn't turn my back. There was something in her gaze, tiredness, but not the desperation that made me feel I had to help. I opened the car door, signaling for her to sit in the front seat. "Sit here," I said, my voice a bit shaky because it had been so long since I'd talked to anyone. I searched in the cloth bag under the seat, took out a half-full water bottle and a packet of crackers. "Drink this. Eat something to regain strength," I said, handing her the water bottle. She took it, drank a long gulp, then opened the cracker packet, nibbling slowly. "Thank you," she said, smiling weakly. "My name is Rose. My car broke down a few miles back. I had to walk. I didn't expect the sun to be so strong." We talked for a while, not deeply, just everyday things. Rose told me she lived in a small nearby town, that she liked gardening, and that today she was going to buy fertilizer. When her car broke down, I told some things about the weather, about the heat. but said nothing about myself. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd tell everything about being homeless, about the pain that was tearing me apart. But Rose didn't ask. She just sat there, eating crackers, drinking water, and smiling every time I said something. For the first time in many weeks, I felt I was talking to a human being, not the darkness inside the car. Rose rested for about half an hour, then got up, thanking me again. "You're very kind," she said with a warm look. "I'll find a way back. I appreciate it." I shook my head, telling her it wasn't necessary, but she just smiled and then left, her small figure disappearing under the sun. I sat back in the car, feeling strange. I didn't know why I had helped her, but doing so made me feel lighter, as if I still had some value, even if it was just a water bottle and some crackers. The next day, around noon, I was sitting in the car, flipping through an old magazine I had found at the station, when I heard a knock on the window. I lowered the towel, and it was Rose. She wore a clean shirt, her hair up, and held a small plastic container. "I brought you this," she said, handing the container through the window. I opened it. The smell of homemade cookies was delicious, with a touch of vanilla, making me remember the days when I baked cookies for Michael. "I made them this morning," Rose said, smiling. "Thank you for yesterday. Without you, I probably would have collapsed on the road." I took the cookie container, my hand a bit shaky. I wanted to say something, but my throat closed. "You didn't have to do this," I whispered with teary eyes. Rose looked at me, her gaze soft, as if she could see what I was hiding. "I've seen you parked here for a few days," she said with a gentle voice. "I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go. If you don't mind, I have a spare room in my house. You can stay a few days, rest a bit." I was breathless. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to cling to the little pride I had left. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want anyone to pity me. But Rose's look had no judgment, only empathy, as if she had been in my place just a few days ago. "Yes," I said, my voice choked, not daring to look her in the eyes. "Thank you, Rose." She nodded, smiling. "It's okay. When you're ready, come. I live nearby." After Rose left the parking lot yesterday, I sat in the car hugging the container of vanilla cookies she had given me, thinking about her invitation. "I have a spare room in my house," she had said, her voice soft but firm. "You can stay a few days, rest a bit." She had said just a few days, but deep down I was afraid. Afraid of becoming a burden. Afraid of facing looks of pity. Afraid that if I accepted, I'd be admitting I had nothing left. I had lived my whole life being self-reliant, raising Michael alone, paying the mortgage alone. Accepting help from a stranger made me feel like I was losing the last bit of dignity I had left. But this morning, I woke up in the car with a sore back and stiff neck, and I knew I couldn't continue like this forever. I took out the piece of paper Rose had left me with her address and decided to drive there. Rose's house was on a quiet street, a small, charming house with a white wooden fence and some flower pots on the porch. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment with my hands gripping the steering wheel. "Can you do this, Margaret?" I whispered, trying to gather courage. I got out, dragging my small suitcase with some clothes and the few belongings I had left, and knocked on the door. Rose opened the door, her smile as warm as the sun. "You came," she said, as if she knew I would. "Come in. Don't be shy." I entered, feeling strange to be standing in a house. The smell of old wood, the sound of the clock ticking, the soft light coming through the window. Rose led me through a small living room with worn armchairs and a bookshelf full of old novels. "This is your room," she said, opening the door to a small room. Inside was only a single bed covered with a blue quilt, a small table, and a window facing the garden. "It's not luxurious, but it's clean," Rose said, smiling. "Just for a few nights so you can regain strength." I left my suitcase, my hands still trembling. "Thank you, Rose," I said, my voice choked. "I don't know how to thank you." Rose shook her head, putting her hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. I was in your place, Margaret. After my divorce, I lost my house. I lost everything. I slept in my car for 3 months, thinking I'd never get through it. But I did, thanks to kind people. Now it's my turn to help you." Her words left me breathless. Rose, with her soft smile and warm gaze, had been homeless. I looked at her, trying to imagine her curled up in a car, scared and alone like me. "You don't have to be ashamed," Rose said, as if she could read my thoughts. "Life sometimes knocks you down, but that doesn't define you. You're here. Rest. And then we'll find a way to move forward." She patted my shoulder and then left me alone in the room. I sat on the bed, stroking the soft quilt. It wasn't silk or anything luxurious, but it was warm, clean, and for the first time in many weeks, I felt safe. I opened my suitcase, took out my mother's silver necklace and put it on the table. I don't know why, but that act made me feel like I still had a part of myself. I lay on the bed, listening to the birds singing outside the window, and felt a warmth spreading through my chest. Not because of the room, not because of the bed, but because of Rose. She hadn't just given me a place to stay, but also hope, something I thought I had lost long ago. That night, Rose brought a cup of hot tea, leaving it on the table. "Rest," she said with a soft voice. "Tomorrow we'll talk more." She left, closing the door gently. I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth go down my throat. I looked around the small room, the lamplight shining on the wall, and I cried. Not from sadness, but because I realized I was no longer alone. Rose had seen me not as a homeless person, but as a human being. And in that moment, I felt I could start over, even if it was just a small step. I lay down, tucked myself in, and for the first time in many weeks, I slept without fear. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I no longer had to face it alone. Rose had opened a door not just to her house, but to a ray of light I thought had gone out forever. Every morning, I woke up in the guest room of Rose's house. The warmth of the blanket around me felt like temporary comfort from the harsh reality outside. My life slowly began to rebuild, piece by piece. But there was one thing that still tormented me. Michael. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way his voice sounded the day he told me to leave, about the way he looked at me with those cold, strange eyes. My son, my child to whom I had sacrificed everything, had thrown me out without thinking twice. How had it come to this? How had the love I had for him become such coldness? Rose had given me space to heal, but even her kindness couldn't fill the void Michael had left in me. I wanted answers, but I knew I might never get them. I couldn't simply let it go, not after everything we had been through. But the reality was that Michael no longer wanted me in his life. And so I began to write. I wrote dozens of letters to him. I never planned to send them. How could I? They were filled with things I wasn't sure I could say to his face. Some of the letters were filled with anger, full of pain and confusion. "Why are you doing this to me, Michael? After everything I've sacrificed for you." I wrote those words not just once, and each time I felt the weight of them crushing me like a great stone. It wasn't his fault. Not entirely. I was angry, yes, but I wasn't sure what had driven him to push me away completely. Other letters were filled with sadness. "I miss you so much, Michael. I miss the child you used to be, the one who called me from school just to tell me he loved me. What happened to him?" I could feel the piercing pain in my chest every time I wrote those words. Tears threatened to fall, but they never quite soaked the paper. I wanted to hold on to him, to reach the man he had been, but I knew it was impossible. Something had changed between us, and I couldn't fix it. And then there were the letters filled with love, the letters that poured out of me when I let my guard down and remembered the bond we once shared. I forgive you, Michael. I always will. You're my son, and I'll always love you, no matter what. Those letters were the hardest to write, the hardest to admit, that I was still capable of loving someone who had hurt me so deeply. But I couldn't help it. I had loved him since the day he was born. A mother's love doesn't fade just because her children turn their backs on her. I wrote and wrote, the ink on paper slowly filling all the words I had kept inside me. Some days I sat in Rose's living room with trembling hands, pouring my heart onto the pages. Other times I wrote late at night, long after Rose had gone to bed, letting the quiet of the night wrap around me while I let the words flow. Through it all, I realized something important. Closure doesn't always come from another person. I had spent so much time waiting for Michael to apologize, to come back and tell me he was sorry for the pain he had caused me. But that wasn't going to happen. Not now, not soon, and maybe not ever. Maybe closure wasn't something that would come from Michael. Maybe it had to come from me. So I kept writing. The more I wrote, the more I began to feel the weight of my anger and sadness lift. It didn't make things right. It didn't repair the broken pieces of my heart, but it helped me let go. I was no longer clinging to hope that Michael would change, that he would suddenly realize how much I had given up for him. I was giving up the need for his approval, his love, his forgiveness. I was learning to forgive myself for thinking he owed me something. Finally, I put down the pen. I didn't feel I needed to write anymore. I had said everything I needed to say. The letters, though never sent, had served their purpose. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace wrapping around me. It wasn't perfect peace. It didn't erase the pain of losing my son. But it was a kind of peace I had been chasing for months. I had given up the need for Michael's approval. I had released my heart in those letters, and somehow that had made it bearable. I folded the letters one by one and put them in a box in the back of my closet. I would never send them. Some of the words were too raw, too painful to share. But they were mine. And in that moment, that was enough. The closure I had been searching for wasn't in Michael's hands. It had been inside me all along. As I sat there in the quiet of the room, I let the silence wrap around me, knowing I had taken one more step toward healing. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. And that was enough for now. One morning, while we were having coffee in the kitchen, Rose handed me a brochure from the community center. "They have free baking classes," she said, her eyes bright. "You like cookies, don't you? Why don't you try it? Maybe you'll find some joy." I looked at the brochure, the image of golden cookies making me remember the days when I baked for Michael. But I shook my head, smiling sadly. "Rose, I'm too old. Who learns a new trade at this age?" She just smiled, putting the brochure in my hand. "You're not old, Margaret. You're just starting a new chapter. Try it." I took the brochure to my room, leaving it on the table next to the box of letters I had written to Michael. I looked at it every day, fighting against the fear of failure. I hadn't learned anything new since I left high school. I had worked as a waitress, cleaner, raising my son, jobs that didn't require degrees, only strength. But there was something in Rose's words that made me want to try. I signed up for the class with my heart pounding hard as I wrote my name on the form. "It's just baking, Margaret," I told myself. "You can do this." The first day of class, I stood awkwardly among strangers, some young girls, some older women, and an elderly man who loved telling stories. The teacher, a cheerful woman named Sarah, guided us through kneading cookie dough. I kneaded the dough with clumsy hands, the dough sticking to my fingers. But when I pressed the cutter, shaping the small cookies, I felt a strange joy. The smell of flour, the soft feeling of dough under my hands, everyone's laughter in class. It all made me feel alive. When the oven dinged, I took out the tray of cookies, golden and delicious. Sarah tried one, nodding her head. Delicious, Margaret. You have talent. I laughed, my face red as if I had just gotten an A in school. The class became the highlight of my week. Every Tuesday, I went to the community center wearing the apron Rose had lent me and learned to make chocolate chip cookies, gingerbread cookies. I even tried decorating them with icing. Once, a little girl in class ate my cookies, smiling from ear to ear. "You make cookies better than my mom," the girl said. I laughed with a warm heart. I began bringing cookies to Rose, and she wouldn't stop praising them. "You should open a bakery, Margaret," she said, winking. I just laughed, but deep down I was proud. I was doing something, not just for myself, but also bringing joy to others. But I knew making cookies wasn't enough to rebuild my life. I needed a job. I needed money. I needed independence. Rose pointed out a convenience store near her house that was looking for someone to work part-time. I put on my cleanest shirt, combed my hair carefully, and went to apply. The owner, a middle-aged man named Frank, looked at me with suspicion. "Have you worked as a cashier before?" he asked. I shook my head honestly. "No, but I learn fast. I'm hardworking." He nodded, handing me a form. "Try it for a week and see how it goes." The first day at the store, I was clumsy with the barcode scanner, forgetting how to enter prices manually. Customers lined up, some sighing, and I wanted to run away. But I remembered Rose's words. "Just do it, Margaret. If you make mistakes, learn." I stayed, asking my coworkers, taking notes of each step. By the end of the week, I was scanning barcodes faster, smiling at customers, even remembering the names of some regular customers. Frank nodded, saying, "You're doing well. Stay." The day I received my first paycheck, I held the thin envelope, my heart pounding hard. I opened it, seeing the small paycheck, barely enough to buy food and pay for gas. But for me, it was treasure. I got home and ran to the kitchen, waving the envelope in front of Rose. "I did it!" I shouted, laughing like a child. Rose hugged me, her eyes shining. "I knew you could do it, Margaret." I sat with my hands still gripping the envelope and cried, not from sadness, but from pride. For the first time in many months, I felt that I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I was rebuilding my life from the broken pieces. I brought some cookies from class to the store, leaving them on the counter for customers. An elderly lady who was buying milk tried a cookie and said, "Who made this so delicious?" I laughed, saying, "I did." The elderly lady nodded, bought another can of soda, and said, "Girl, you have talent." I wasn't a girl. I was 55 years old, but her words made me feel young again, strong again. I stood behind the counter, watching the flow of people, and realized I was finding myself again. Every day, every cookie, every paycheck, I felt I owed Rose more than I could express in words. She had given me a home when I only had my car as refuge. She had given me hope when I thought I had nothing left. At Rose's house, I learned to laugh again, to live, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I was very grateful to her, and when my salary from the convenience store began to accumulate, I wanted to have my own space. Not because I didn't value Rose, but because I didn't want to bother her anymore. I wanted to prove I could take care of myself, that her kindness hadn't been in vain. I began looking for an apartment a few weeks ago, when the small paychecks from the convenience store job and the joy of the baking class gave me enough courage to think about a new beginning. Rose was the one who planted that idea. One night, while we were having tea in the kitchen, she handed me the local newspaper, pointing to the rental section. "You need your own space, Margaret," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "It's not that I don't want you to stay here. It's that you deserve a place to call home." I took the newspaper with my heart pounding hard. I knew she was right, but the idea of renting an apartment scared me. I had never done this alone. When I was young, I rented an apartment with my husband, and then we bought a house for Michael. Now, at 55, I had to learn to start from scratch. I called some numbers from the newspaper, met with some landlords, but most wanted long-term contracts or large deposits. I was about to give up, thinking I'd depend on Rose forever. But then I saw a small ad. Cheap one-bedroom apartment near downtown. I called immediately and spoke with the owner, Helen, an older woman with a gruff voice. "The apartment is old. It's not pretty, but it's clean," she said over the phone. "Do you want to see it?" I made an appointment, carrying the envelope with my savings, my hand trembling as I drove there. The apartment was on the second floor of an old building. The wooden stairs creaked under each step. Helen opened the door and I entered a small room. Walls painted white with paint peeling in some places, scratched wooden floors, a smell of old paint and dust floating in the air. The window faced an alley, and the small kitchen in the corner had a dripping faucet. "It's not a palace," Helen said, crossing her arms. "But the rent is low and I don't ask many questions." I walked around, touched the window frame, feeling the sunlight coming through the glass. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't the house I had dreamed of, but I felt it belonged to me. I gave Helen the deposit, signing the contract with trembling hands. She handed me the key, a small, cold silver key in my palm. "Congratulations," she said, her voice emotionless. Then she left. I stood there alone with the key clutched in my hand, listening to the sound of the door closing. I walked to the center of the room, looking around. No table, no chairs, just some boxes with the things I had brought from Rose's house. And then I cried. I didn't cry from sadness, but because I had done it. Me, Margaret, who thought I'd never get through the dark days, was now here in my own apartment. I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the wall, stroking the key. "This is my home," I whispered, my voice choked. The word home sounded strange but powerful. It wasn't the cold car. It wasn't Rose's temporary room. It was my home. I thought about the days when I thought I'd collapse, when I only had some clothes and a broken heart. But I had overcome it, step by step. And now I was here with a new chance to live. I opened the boxes, took out some things. My mother's silver necklace, a small picture frame without a photo, and a tray of cookies I had made in class. I put the necklace on the windowsill, the picture frame on the floor, and the cookie tray on the small kitchen table. I didn't have much, but these things were mine and made the room feel less empty. I got up, opened the window, letting the fresh breeze in, bringing with it the smell of grass from somewhere. I breathed deeply, feeling my chest lighten as if an invisible weight had been lifted from me. That night, I returned to Rose's house to thank her and collect the rest of my things. She hugged me, her eyes bright. "You did it, Margaret," she said, handing me an old blanket. "Take this to keep you warm." I laughed, hugging her tight. "Thank you, Rose. If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be." She shook her head, saying, "You did it yourself. I just gave you a little push." I returned to my apartment, spread the blanket over the old mattress Helen had left, and lay down. The noise of traffic outside the alley reached me, but I wasn't afraid. I felt safe, not because the apartment was secure, but because I knew I had saved myself. I looked at the ceiling, the streetlight coming through the window. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I had a place to call home. I had overcome the dark days. And even though this apartment was old, even though the life ahead would be difficult, I was proud. I had rebuilt my life from the broken pieces, thanks to Rose, thanks to myself. But Michael, the son who had been my whole world and also the one who had destroyed me, remained an unhealed wound. I thought I had learned to live without him. But when the phone rang and his name appeared on the screen, I knew I wasn't ready. I sat in the kitchen chair with the phone clutched in my hand, my thumb hovering over the answer button. I wanted to turn it off. I wanted to pretend he didn't exist. But something in me, maybe a mother's love, made me press the button. "Hello?" I said, my voice dry, my heart pounding hard. "Mom." Michael's voice sounded shaky, not like the cold man who had told me to leave. "Mom, I was wrong. I was selfish. Jessica and I fought. She left. I didn't know what I was doing when I threw you out." I remained silent, letting his words sink in. I had waited for this moment in the letters I had written, but hearing him say it for real was different. It hurt me, but it also confused me. "Mom," he continued, his voice choked. "I'm sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him why he had let Jessica say the words that made me feel worthless. Why had he chosen her over me? But I also heard the sincerity in his voice, the regret I never thought he'd have. "Michael," I said, my voice trembling, "I need to see you. We need to talk face to face." He agreed immediately, his voice relieved, as if he feared I would refuse. We met at a small cafe a few blocks from my apartment. I arrived early in my cleanest shirt, hair pulled back, with a cup of coffee in my hand to hide my trembling. When Michael entered, I was breathless. He looked different, thinner, with sunken eyes, shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying a burden. He sat across from me, looking at me with an anxious, hopeful gaze. "Mom," he began to say, but I raised my hand, interrupting him. "Let me talk first," I said, my voice calm but firm. I breathed deeply, feeling as if all the letters I had written were coming to life. "Michael, you and Jessica hurt me. You threw me out of my house, out of your life, as if I were nothing. I gave you everything, my time, my energy, my dreams. Now, you said the house was small, that you needed space for the baby. But that didn't hurt me as much as your silence, letting her speak for you. I felt worthless, as if all my sacrifices meant nothing." Michael lowered his head, his eyes red. I saw he wanted to speak, but I continued. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I need you to understand. I've rebuilt my life piece by piece, and I'm proud. But the wound you left is still there. I don't know if I can trust you again." I stopped, my throat closing, but I didn't cry. I had cried enough already. Michael looked at me with tears running down his face. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how stupid I was being. Jessica wanted space, and I thought it was the right thing. But I was wrong. So wrong. I lost her, and more importantly, I lost you. I'm sorry, Mom. I want to make things right, even if it's just a little." He dried his eyes, and I saw the Michael who used to be, the child who hugged me when I was tired, whispering, "Mom is a superhero." I was silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. I no longer felt anger, but I also didn't feel like everything was fixed. "Michael," I said, my voice slow. "I hear your apologies and I know you're sincere, but I can't pretend nothing happened. I'm learning to live for myself. And forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. I forgive you because I don't want to hold resentment in my heart. But you need time, and so do I." He nodded, his eyes still red. "I understand, Mom. I just want to try again. I want you to be proud of me again." I smiled, a small, fragile smile. "You've already started when you called me," I said. "Keep going, Michael. Step by step." I extended my hand and touched his for the first time in many months. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a beginning. I left the cafe walking under the dim sunlight. I still felt the wound, but it no longer weighed as heavy as before. I had learned that forgiving was for me, not for Michael, not for Jessica. My life wasn't a fairy tale, but it was mine, and I loved it. I began teaching baking classes at the community center about a year after moving to my apartment. At first, I only planned to help sometimes, but when I saw the young and older women arrive with eyes full of fear and hope, I knew I had to stay. They were like me before, homeless, without family, without faith. I taught them to knead dough, mix sugar, bake golden cookies. But more than that, I told them my story. I used to sleep in my car, I said while kneading dough. I thought I was worthless, but I got up, and you can too. They listened, some crying, some laughing. And when they took the cookie tray out of the oven, I saw their eyes light up like the light I found when Rose gave me that box of cookies that day. Every Tuesday, I stood in front of the class with my apron tied around my waist, guiding each step. "Don't be afraid of the dough sticking to your hands," I said, laughing heartily. "It's a sign you're doing it right." There was a young woman named Emma who had lived in her car like me. One day she brought chocolate cookies, saying, "Mrs. Margaret, I made this for you. Thank you for giving me hope." I hugged her, trying not to cry. I wasn't just teaching how to make cookies. I was helping them find themselves as I had done. Rose remained my best friend. We met several times a week, drinking coffee, talking about everything from the flowers in her garden to the difficult days we had overcome. Rose never boasted, but I knew she was proud of me. "You're living proof, Margaret," she'd say, winking. "I just gave you a little push, but you walked the whole way." I'd laugh, hugging her, knowing that without Rose, maybe I'd still be lost. I never forgot her kindness and tried to give it back by helping others as she had done for me. With Michael, things remained complicated. We talked. Not often, but enough for me to know he was trying. He got back with Jessica and they had a daughter, my granddaughter. I met the baby several times, holding her in my arms, feeling joy and pain at the same time. Jessica remained Jessica, not friendly, but no longer as cold as before. I accepted her, not for her sake, but for Michael and my granddaughter. But I maintained boundaries. I loved Michael, but I wouldn't let him or anyone hurt me again. I had learned that love doesn't mean sacrificing everything. It's knowing what you're worth, knowing when to say enough. There are days when I look at myself in the mirror and see more gray hair, deeper wrinkles. But I also see a strong woman. I see Margaret, the one who thought she couldn't get up but did. I see a person who knows how to cry, knows how to laugh, knows how to love without losing herself. The scars from the past are still there, the pain Michael caused, the lonely nights. But they no longer hurt me. They are the marks of the journey, reminding me how far I've come. I'm in the kitchen baking cookies for next week's class. The smell of vanilla fills the apartment. I think about the letters I wrote to Michael that are still in the shoebox under the bed. I no longer need to open them. I've said everything I needed to say, not to him, but to myself. I have forgiven not only Michael, but myself. For the times I thought I wasn't good enough, strong enough. I am enough. And that's the greatest gift I've given myself. I go out to the small balcony, looking at the streetlights twinkling below. Life isn't perfect. The apartment is still old. Money is still tight. And I still have sad days. But I have me, Margaret, the one who has found herself again. I have Rose. I have the class. I have the smiles of my students, and I have hope. That small light I thought had gone out but now shines in my heart. I breathe deeply, smile, and whisper, "You did it, Margaret." And I know I'll keep doing it every day until the end of the road.